Operation Desert Storm is a victory for the United States and its fellow coalition members. President George H.W. Bush, however, does not face another victory in the elections and loses to the charismatic Arkansas politician Bill Clinton in 1992. As the Clinton government finds its footing, the United States Special Forces are about to face off against a new breed of terrorist, one that will continue to change into the 21st century and bring forth unprecedented acts of terrorism against the USA and its allies. The rules of war are rewritten through the changing political and world landscape of the 21st century. The United States Special Forces continue their show of adaptability throughout and maintain their adherence to their 5 truths. Truth 1. Humans are more important than hardware. People, not equipment, make the critical difference. The right people, highly trained and working as a team, will accomplish the mission with the equipment available. On the other hand, the best equipment in the world cannot compensate for a lack of the right people. Truth 2. Quality is better than quantity. A small number of people, carefully selected, well-trained, and well-led, are preferable to larger numbers of troops, some of whom may not be up to the task. Truth 3. Special Operations Forces cannot be mass-produced. It takes years to train operational units to the level of proficiency needed to accomplish difficult and specialized SOF missions. Intense training, both in SOF schools and units, is required to integrate competent individuals into fully capable units. This process cannot be hastened without degrading ultimate capability. Truth 4. Competent Special Operations Forces cannot be created after emergencies occur. Creation of competent, fully mission-capable units takes time. Employment of fully capable special operations capability on short notice requires trained and constantly available SOF units in peacetime. Truth 5. Most special operations require non-SOF assistance. The operational effectiveness of our deployed forces cannot be, and never has been achieved, without being enabled by our joint service partners. The support of Air Force, Army, Marine and Navy engineers, technicians, intelligence analysts, and the numerous other professions that contribute to SOF have substantially increased our capabilities and effectiveness throughout the world. In December 1992, President Bush brings the U.S. military hand in hand with the United Nations for Operation Restore Hope. Their goal is to bring order and aid to the war-torn country of Somalia, racked by civil war and ever-splintering factions. Humanitarian acts, as the Unified Task Force or UNITAF learns, are made near impossible in a war zone. On December 3rd, the UN passes Resolution 794, which authorizes the use of all necessary means to establish as soon as possible a secure environment for humanitarian relief operations in Somalia. Leading amongst these factions are those under the command of Mohammed Farah Aidid, the self-proclaimed president of Somalia, and his Somali National Alliance. Aidid will prove UNITAF's greatest enemy. On August 8, 1993, his militia bombs a U.S. vehicle. 4 MPs are killed. 7 more MPs are killed later in the month. President Bill Clinton, months into his term, finds himself challenged by Aidid. A special task force made up of 400 Delta Force operatives and Army Rangers is born. Its name is Task Force Ranger. Their mission: hunt down Mohammed Farah Aidid. Major General William F. Garrison deploys with his team to Somalia on August 22nd. They make their headquarters in a hangar in Mogadishu, Somalia's capital city. The conditions are not favorable, as the site is in disrepair and lacks clean water. Task Force Ranger stages raids to confiscate arms and arrest sympathizers of the warlord, and familiarize themselves with the streets of war-torn Mogadishu. Their capture of Osman Ali Attu, chief financier for Aidid, on September 21st is a prologue of things to come. A U.S. Black Hawk helicopter is shot down 4 days later by a rocket-propelled grenade. 3 crew members are killed. For the SNA, it is a small victory against U.S. forces. The UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter is manufactured by Sikorsky and has been a reliable transport for the U.S. Army since 1979. Both a lift and assault craft, the Black Hawk is propelled by twin rotors and manned by a 4-man crew. It carries 11 combat troops and is used for everything from recon to medevac to air assault. Task Force Ranger will see its mettle tested in what starts as a 1-hour operation, but will go down as Day of the Rangers. At 1350 hours, Task Force Ranger receives intelligence on the location of Aidid's top political advisor, Mohammed Hassan Awali, and Foreign Minister Omar Salad Elmi. Their plan is promptly made. 2 MH-6 Little Bird helicopters will deploy Delta operatives to attack the building. 4 Rangers will rappel down the building's side from hovering Black Hawk helicopters and secure a corner each. 9 Hummers and 3 M939 trucks will arrive to pick up the assault team and prisoners. The Little Birds face a dust storm created by their rotors when they arrive at 1542 hours. One of the Little Birds is forced to land away from its position. The Black Hawks face their own problems, as Black Hawk, called Super 67, accidentally lands a block north from the intended target. Ranger Private First Class Todd Blackburn is injured while fast roping down and needed to be evacuated by the Humvees. Sergeant Dominic Pilla, riding in a Humvee, is shot in the head and killed by Somali militants hiding amongst the streets. At 1620 hours, a rocket-propelled grenade finds its mark with one of the Black Hawks, Super 61. Sergeant Jim Smith and Sergeant Daniel Bush do their best to defend the crash site from Somali militants. The men are rescued by a Little Bird. Bush will later succumb to having been shot 4 times. The fallen Black Hawk is investigated by a combat search and rescue team, despite an RPG hit to their helicopter. They find pilots Cliff Elvis Walcott and Donovan Briley are dead from the RPG hit, while 2 crew chiefs are severely injured. Kevlar plates from the fallen helicopter formed a makeshift shelter. The ground assault forces, meanwhile, are the victims of their own miscommunication. One keeps expecting the other to make the call for support.
6-4, are you okay? Roger. 6-4 still down. 6-4 is this is Radio 6-4, over.
An RPG downs another Black Hawk helicopter, Super 64, piloted by Chief Warrant Officer 3 Michael Durant. It is 1640 hours.
Roger, he is 200 meters of the RP. Roger, we just got we have a Black Hawk, so we're sending a lot of LCC-5. Is it overhead? We lost this the electric hotel. South National, we got a little hot equipment overhead. Great, I think we need to ask the QRF to second response to drive the north over.
The assault team convenes on the first crash site to rescue survivors and meet heavy fire by the Somalis. They are forced to take over several nearby houses with their wounded for shelter. They will be there all night. Seeing the wreckage of Durant's Black Hawk, Delta snipers Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Shugart are inserted to rescue Durant and his crew from a mob of Somalis heading towards the wreck. Their aim, even in the chaos, is true, and several of the mob are wounded. Their helicopter, however, is hit by an RPG and forced to withdraw. Shugart is killed by the mob, leaving Gordon to arm Durant with the fallen soldier's Car-15 rifle. 10 more minutes later, the crowd kills Gordon. The crew of the fallen Black Hawk are killed by the mob, and Durant himself is beaten. The arrival of Aidid's militia save him from death, but to live as a prisoner of the warlord. While the American positions face an angry crowd of Somalis, They are kept in check by Littlebird gunships, operated by the Night Stalkers. The violence continues throughout the night. Malaysian and Pakistani forces accompany a relief convoy. With no contingency planning done in advance, they will face further hurdles in rescuing the fallen soldiers. The convoy is awesome. General Garrison dispatches them at once. 4 Pakistani tanks, American M939 flatbed trucks and Humvees, and the Malaysian Gondor APC armored personnel carriers. They are given air support by Cobra Assault and Black Hawk helicopters. 4.5 hours later, the Battle of Mogadishu is over, but the violence isn't. The rescue convoy is out of room for all of the forces, leaving a group of Delta operators and rangers to walk the very long mile to their rendezvous. This Mogadishu Mile is the final gauntlet for the soldiers as they face danger hidden in alleys and rooftops. One operative is shot in the back, Sergeant Randall J. Ramaglia, and killed by the assassin's bullet. The Battle of Mogadishu, originally intended as a quick mission, was a bloodbath. 18 U.S. soldiers are killed, while 73 are wounded. The Somalis, combined from militia and civilians, numbered between 315 to 2,000 casualties. The American dead are not so lucky, as their corpses are dragged through the streets by Somalis. One soldier's body is even beheaded. CW3 Durant is held prisoner for 11 days by the SNA, his nose, eye socket, and cheekbone broken from the crowd. While prisoner, Durant is shot in the leg and tied up with a dog chain in an empty concrete room. He holds on to life, even endearing himself to his captors. 11 days later, he is released into U.S. custody. In the aftermath of the Battle of Mogadishu, President Bill Clinton awards the Medal of Honor posthumously to 2 of the fallen Americans, Master Sergeant Gary I. Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randall D. Shugart.
Gary Gordon and Randall Shugart died in the most courageous and selfless way any human being can act. They risked their lives without hesitation. They gave their lives to save others. Their actions were clearly above and beyond the call of duty. Today, on behalf of the United States Congress, I award them both the Medal of Honor. They join a roll of heroes that include soldiers like Sergeant York, Audie Murphy, Jimmy Doolittle, Teddy Roosevelt Jr., Senator Kerry, and only some 3,000 others across more than 2 centuries of our nation's history. We will remember Sergeants Gordon and Shugart not only as heroes who fell in battle, but as good men who loved their families.
They are the first Medals of Honor since Vietnam. There is more to the Battle of Mogadishu than Aidid's faction and violent Somalis, as the United States will learn. The unruly mob was armed and trained by a man soon to become the enemy of not only the U.S., but also the world, Osama Bin Laden. A native of Saudi Arabia, Bin Laden grew up into an affluent family, the 17th of 52 children. Bin Laden was a member of the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood. The teachings of the religion found themselves perverted as he latched onto the teachings of Abdullah Azzam, a radical who believed Muslims should stage a holy war and create a singular Islamic state, and that elements of Western society were viewed as destructive to the Middle Eastern way of life. With the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan in the late 1970s, Bin Laden joined the resistance. With his mentor Azzam, they ran a global network for recruits in their jihad. Mektab al-Khidmat had offices throughout the world and pulled migrant radical Islamists in for the fight. Bin Laden creates a new terrorist group in 1988, Al Qaida, and returned to Saudi Arabia to raise money for his new terrorist group. Saudi royalty, fearful of Bin Laden's anti-Western agenda, revoked his passport and found help with the United States. It only deepens the fanatics' hatred of the West. Al Qaida will become a thorn in America's side, not from his home country of Saudi Arabia, but from the Sudan. Osama bin Laden is responsible for both arming and training the Somali rebels in Mogadishu. He is linked to the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. Bin Laden is the face of a new type of warfare, a fanatic terrorism that refuses to play by the rules of war and instead embraces savagery and violence. President George W. Bush becomes the 43rd President of the United States on January 20, 2001, just over a decade since his father ended his one and only term. Little does President Bush know the challenges he will face in his 2 terms, nor could he suspect the changing face of warfare to come. It is 8:45 on a sunny morning in New York City, when American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767, crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center on the 80th floor. At 9:03, a second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, crashes into the South Tower, exploding. Both towers will fall. In Washington, D.C., American Airlines Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon's west side. It is 9:45. All 3 planes are hijacked by terrorists with, as the world will soon learn, Al Qaida. United Flight 93 is taken captive just 40 minutes after takeoff. Its passengers, knowing they are doomed either way, fight back and presumably defeat the hijackers. It crashes in a field in Pennsylvania, killing the 45 passengers, but saving the plane's intended target. In all, 2,977 innocent victims are counted for, with thousands of injuries. America finds itself at war. President Bush, less than a year into his first term, is forced to face a war against no one country, but against a twisted and evil ideology.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could.
As Al Qaida claims credit for the 9/11 attacks, Bush declares a war on terror against the Al Qaida. 3 days after the attacks, the government passes the authorization for the use of military force against terrorists. They will defeat bin Laden and his followers and end state sponsorship of terrorists. The United States will smoke out the wily terrorists from their hiding places. Taking down Al Qaida and Afghanistan's Taliban government requires a military presence that can adapt to war without rules and can be ready on a moment's notice to intervene. The early 21st century will see special forces come to the forefront of international conflict. Afghanistan, once ruled by the Soviets, fell into the hands of the rebels, the Mujahideen, who had received support from the West. Since both nature and politics abhor a vacuum, the remaining factions of Mujahideen turned amongst themselves in a civil war. In 1994, one of those factions, the Taliban, came into play. These religious zealots, led by Mullah Muhammad Omar, believed in their own brand of Sharia law, one that perverted the beliefs of Islam to one that best serves this power-hungry faction. Bin Laden allies himself with the Taliban, bringing vehicles and jihadists. Two of his terrorists kill Ahmad Shah Massoud, leader of the Western sympathetic Northern Alliance, on September 9th, setting the stage for Taliban Al Qaida rule. After 9/11, the United States is officially backed by many NATO countries. This is not just an American war on terrorism, but a global one. Afghanistan refuses to give up bin Laden to the Americans. The U.S. sends in a small covert team on September 26th, dubbed Jawbreaker, landing in the Panjshir Valley under cover of dark. This 8-man team is comprised of the CIA's Special Activities Division and Counter-Terrorist Center. Using satellite communications, this reconnaissance team also comes with $3 million in U.S. bills, with the intent of recruiting Northern Alliance support. Jawbreaker lays the groundwork for Operation Enduring Freedom. It starts with Operation Crescent Wind, where coalition airstrikes destroy most of the Taliban's radar and command units, aircraft, and SA-2 and SA-3 surface-to-air missiles. The way is clear for ground forces, which brings 4 major special forces task forces, all under the leadership of General Tommy Franks, commander of the coalition forces. They are Combined Joint Task Force Mountain, the Joint Interagency Task Force Counterterrorism, Coalition Joint Civil Military Operations Task Force, and Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force, or JSOTF. This last one, the JSOTF, consists of 3 task forces. Colonel John Mulholland's Task Force Dagger, deployed to the north of Afghanistan, Dagger is partly there to liberate the oppressed in training guerrilla forces through infiltrating SF Operational Detachment Alpha teams. Task Force K-Bar is led by Captain Robert Harward, a Navy SEAL. Structured with 16-man platoons, K-Bar was used in part on recon and surveillance missions. K-Bar also included coalition nation special forces, such as Canada's Joint Task Force 2 and Germany's Kommando Spezialkräfte. Then there is Task Force Sword, the hunter-killer force, tasked with killing senior leadership and other targets of worth to the enemy. On October 19th, 12-man ODA 555, with the members of Jawbreaker, meet with warlord representatives of Fahim Khan, the latest military commander of the Northern Alliance, to begin joint operations. ODA 595 allies itself later that night, in spite of a treacherous sandstorm, with Uzbek warlord general Abdul Rashid Dostum, who has no love for the Taliban. A combat drop is staged in southern Afghanistan. Airmen from the 23rd Special Tactics Squadron and near 200 Army Rangers from 3rd Battalion 75th Ranger Regiment drop south of a Kandahar airstrip. The seizure of this strategic achievement is filmed and televised by the United States. The world and the Taliban are watching. A special forces team attempts to capture Taliban leader Mullah Omar in his compound. They do, however, find something nearly as valuable: intelligence. A firefight ensues against Taliban fighters, right before the operators are successfully extracted. The casualties, due to the classified nature of the mission, remain publicly unconfirmed. Coalition forces continue to work side by side with anti-Taliban Northern Alliance, be they on the ground, through airstrikes, or even on horseback. The city of Mazar-e Sharif, entrenched with Taliban fighters, falls in a day in a combination of ground forces and airstrikes. Another important and vital aspect of Operation Enduring Freedom was a psychological one. Flyers announcing the $25 million reward on bin Laden were dropped by the air, and civil affairs teams under Task Force Dagger moved into Mazar-e Sharif to win the trust of the Afghanis. 3 days later, the capital city of Kabul is taken by General Fahim Khan and coalition forces, forcing Al Qaida and Taliban out to the mountains in East Afghanistan. more cities and villages fall until, on November 23rd, the Taliban officially surrender. Kandahar follows on December 6, 2001. Operation Enduring Freedom concludes in a mere 49 days from the start. It is a testimony to the effectiveness of special forces and their ability to not only fight, but to also lead the way to success. But Bin Laden and many of his followers remain at large, having escaped to the eastern city of Jalalabad. There, they have access to the Tora Bora, a series of underground caves left over during their war against the Soviet Union years before. They are a mere dozen miles from the Pakistani border. Special Forces operators team up with local militia to eliminate Al Qaida. The militia forces total near 3,000, led by ODA 572 and members of Jawbreaker. They also engage warlords Mohammad Zaman and Hazrat Ali. The fighting ends around December 17th, after nearly 1,000 Al Qaida retreat under cover of a false ceasefire with coalition forces. Several hundred Al Qaida are killed, and a coalition group, led by a SEAL platoon, clean up the 70 underground cages and 60 structures to gain intelligence. The Taliban regroup in 2002, and with Al Qaida, continue to fight the coalition forces, with Operation Anaconda launched to eliminate the remaining forces. With Anaconda concluded on March 19th, NATO established the International Security Assistance Force to help Afghanistan transition into a new government and to keep the Taliban from rising back up. With the Hussein regime in Iraq and the dictators once more firing on American aircraft, Iraq had been a sponsor of terrorism since the George H.W. Bush administration and Desert Storm. With Iraq's apparent ownership of weapons of mass destruction, the United States launched Operation Iraqi Freedom to depose Hussein.
On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign. More than 35 countries are giving crucial support, from the use of naval and air bases to help with intelligence and logistics to the deployment of combat units. Every nation in this coalition has chosen to bear the duty and share the honor of serving in our common defense. To all the men and women of the United States Armed Forces now in the Middle East, the peace of a troubled world and the hopes of an oppressed people now depend on you. That trust is well placed. The enemies you confront will come to know your skill and bravery. The people you liberate will witness the honorable and decent spirit of the American military. In this conflict, America faces an enemy who has no regard for conventions of war or rules of morality. Saddam Hussein has placed Iraqi troops and equipment in civilian areas, attempting to use innocent men, women, and children as shields for his own military, a final atrocity against his people.
General Tommy Franks and Brigadier General Gary Shooter Harrell, himself a Special Forces veteran, devise a strategy to depose Saddam Hussein that works on 3 fronts. Special Forces operators will scour deserts of western Iraq to destroy Scud-tail launchers that can endanger air forces and provide reconnaissance. In the north, Special Forces will distract Iraqi forces from Baghdad by working with local guerrilla fighters and establish deployment sites for future forces. The Special Forces in the south will seize Hussein's oil resources and transportation hubs, while a covert unit will work on finding both weapons of mass destruction and high-ranking members of the Hussein regime. On March 20th, Operation Iraqi Freedom officially begins. Airstrikes, dubbed Shock and Awe, began. Military and Special Forces entered, sometimes covertly, from south, east, and west. Also present is the Naval Task Group, or NTG, assembled of Navy SEAL Teams 8 and 10, British Royal Marines of 40 and 42 Commandos, Polish Special Ops GROM, and U.S. PSYOP and Civil Affairs. Their mission is to procure Iraq's only deepwater port, Qasr, and other oil pipeline facilities, including 2 platforms. it is a small force of Green Berets, only 26, divided into A-teams ODA 391 and ODA 392, tasked with capturing a junction between both Kirkuk and Mosul, near the village of Debeka. This pass will cleave Highway 2 and cut Iraqi movement in the north. Iraqi defenders stand watch on the Zarak-Ziradag Ridge, overlooking the vital crossroads. B-52s unleash bombardment on the ridge, signaling for Green Berets from ODA 44 and 150 Peshmerga fighters to lay claim to Objective Rock, a T-junction that leads to the crossroads and the village. They will be given cover fire by ODA 391 and 392. North of them, 500 Peshmerga will advance on the ridge. Even further north, ODA 43 and their 150 Kurd guerrilla support will attack and siege the commanding hill called Objective Stone, with ODAs 394 and 395 providing fire support. ODAs 044, 391, and 392 in the south of the war zone are forced to drive their ground mobility vehicles around the roadway to Objective Rock from a combination of dirt berms and mines laid by Iraqi forces. They encounter Iraqi bunkers, but quickly overtake them and continue to the Debeka Pass, eliminating resistance as they go. 3 trucks approach the Green Berets. They hold fire when the drivers blink their headlights, assuming it a sign of surrender. But it is anything but. Smoke grenades are fired, concealing 6 Iraqi MTLB APCs that drive from the fumes, firing on the ODAs. The American .50 caliber machine gun rounds and MK-19 grenade launchers cause a slowing down of the APCs, but only so they can split apart to reveal 4 T-55 tanks no more than 900 yards away. Their only hope is in the Javelin anti-tank missiles outfitted to their GMVs. This fire-and-forget shoulder-mounted anti-tank missile uses infrared guidance. Upon firing, a rocket motor engages and flies the Javelin to its target. It also features seeker capabilities to hit a moving target. The Javelins, however, take time to warm up and arm. Their only option is to flee the 100mm gunfire from the T-55s by moving 900 meters back from the crossroads. This will be their Alamo, or last stand. The ODAs call for backup and learn it will take 30 minutes to arrive. They must hold off an overwhelming number of Iraqis for half an hour. Javelin missiles succeed in holding the encroaching forces back when air support arrives. Twin Navy F-14s fly onto the scene. The pilot of one jet, however, mistakes his target. The 2,000-pound bomb goes off amongst friendly forces, killing a dozen Peshmerga, wounding 4 coalition members, and injuring a BBC camera crew. The bombing does affect the Iraqi assault, leading some to surrender. Arriving on the scene, however, were 6 enforcers of the Ba'ath Party, who executed those Iraqis attempting to surrender. 1 T-55 is destroyed. Not long after, 2 Navy F-A-18s arrived and drove off the remaining Iraqi armor. 26 Special Forces operatives held off a mechanized convoy of tanks and artillery. The Battle of Debeka Pass has gone down in the annals of the Special Forces. Hussein still eludes capture, but his sons Uday and Qusay are not so lucky. The brothers, along with Qusay's 14-year-old son, are hiding out in the Mosul suburb of Al-Falah, in the home of their informer, who stands to collect $15 million for each brother. On July 22nd, 101st Airborne established a perimeter around the house. Delta operators stand ready for forced entry. Loudspeakers broadcast a chance for peaceful surrender. Uday and Qusay refuse to take it, forcing the Delta to push through the front door with flash grenades. They face off against small arms fire from the 2. It will take 2 more attempts, punctuated with .50 caliber fire and AT-3 rockets, to finally gain entry. Qusay lies dead. Uday, armed and holed up in a bathroom and severely injured, is shot and killed by a Delta operator. Qusay's son opens fire, and the Delta operators are forced to shoot and kill him. Intelligence pinpoints the deposed dictator's location to a farm compound outside Al-Dor and south of Tikrit. Operation Red Dawn goes underway, with the 1st Brigade Combat Team, 4th Infantry, surrounding in a cordon, and Delta operators from C Squadron searching 2 different locations, Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2. Hussein is nowhere to be found. One operator, however, notices an exposed board. Kicking it aside, he reveals a spider hole. Before a fragment grenade can be dropped, Hussein reveals himself. A Delta operator hits him with the butt of his M4 carbine and disarms him of his Glock. Found within his hideout is an AK-47 and $750,000 in cash. His hair is unkempt and his beard grown out and scraggly. Hussein offers no resistance. An Iraqi special tribunal sentences him to death by hanging for crimes against humanity. Saddam Hussein, once dictator and mass murderer, is hanged to death on December 30th, 2006. Barack Obama becomes the 44th President of the United States, with the specter of Osama Bin Laden still looming. 2 years into his term, the new president delivers on a mission started by his predecessor.
Good evening. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama Bin Laden, the leader of Al Qaida, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. It was nearly 10 years ago that a bright September day was darkened by the worst attack on the American people in our history. The images of 9/11 are seared into our national memory. Hijacked planes cutting through a cloudless September sky, the Twin Towers collapsing to the ground, black smoke billowing up from the Pentagon, the wreckage of Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where the actions of heroic citizens saved even more heartbreak and destruction. And yet we know that the worst images are those that were unseen to the world. The empty seat at the dinner table, children who were forced to grow up without their mother or their father, parents who would never know the feeling of their child's embrace, nearly 3,000 citizens taken from us, leaving a gaping hole in our hearts. On September 11th, 2001, in our time of grief, the American people came together. We offered our neighbors a hand, and we offered the wounded our blood. We reaffirmed our ties to each other and our love of community and country. On that day, no matter where we came from, what God we prayed to, or what race or ethnicity we were united as one American family. We were also united in our resolve to protect our nation and to bring those who committed this vicious attack to justice. Today, at my direction, the United States launched a targeted operation against that compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. A small team of Americans carried out the operation with extraordinary courage and capability. No Americans were harmed. They took care to avoid civilian casualties. After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body. For over 2 decades, bin Laden has been Al Qaeda's leader and symbol, and has continued to plot attacks against our country and our friends and allies. The death of bin Laden marks the most significant achievement to date in our nation's effort to defeat Al Qaeda. Yet his death does not mark the end of our effort. There's no doubt that Al Qaeda will continue to pursue attacks against us. We must, and we will, remain vigilant at home and abroad.
It is around 1 a.m. in Pakistan, when 23 Navy SEALs and 2 different Black Hawk helicopters lower over the compound in Abbottabad. One crash lands into the compound, but fortunately, no one is injured. The SEALs, adept at rolling with a punch, land their second helicopter outside the compound and move out. The crashed helicopters team blows open a door into the house, while the outside team blows a hole through another entrance. Before long, they are inside bin Laden's compound. It is dark inside. CIA operatives were sure to cut the power, leaving the terrorist mastermind in pitch black. A SEAL shoots and kills an armed courier, Ibrahim Saeed Ahmed. Abrar Ahmed, his brother, is shot dead by a SEAL, as is his wife. The SEALs encounter a metal door to the upper floors, which they blow open with C4 explosive. Bin Laden's 23-year-old son, Khalid, is shot dead by SEALs. In the third-floor bedroom, for 15 minutes in the dark, is Osama Bin Laden. The SEALs shoot Osama Bin Laden on sight. Laying mortally wounded on his bedroom floor, SEALs fire killing shots directly into his chest. The raid lasts about 40 minutes. 5 Al Qaida are shot and killed, including Bin Laden and an adult son. In Washington, D.C., President Obama is watching via drone footage. The SEALs collect as much evidence and intelligence as they can. Revealed is Bin Laden's planned assassination attempt on the president's life and his plans to attack the United States on the 10th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. Even though the mastermind behind Al Qaida is dead, terrorism still erupts in the Middle East. A new terrorist group, ISIL, or the Islamic State, comes to attention in 2013. In his final State of the Union address on January 12th, President Barack Obama stresses the need to approach ISIL differently than prior terrorist groups, such as Al Qaeda.
Priority number 1 is protecting the American people and going after terrorist networks. Both Al Qaeda and now ISIL pose a direct threat to our people because in today's world, even a handful of terrorists who place no value on human life, including their own, can do a lot of damage. They use the internet to poison the minds of individuals inside our country. Their actions undermine and destabilize our allies. We have to take them out. But as we focus on destroying ISIL, over-the-top claims that this is World War III just play into their hands. Masses of fighters on the back of pickup trucks, twisted souls plotting in apartments or garages, they pose an enormous danger to civilians. They have to be stopped. But they do not threaten our national existence. That is the story ISIL wants to tell. That's the kind of propaganda they use to recruit. We don't need to build them up to show that we're serious. And we sure don't need to push away vital allies in this fight by echoing the lie that ISIL is somehow representative of one of the world's largest religions. We just need to call them what they are, killers and fanatics who have to be rooted out, hunted down, and destroyed. And that's exactly what we're doing. For more than a year, America has led a coalition of more than 60 countries to cut off ISIL's financing, disrupt their plots, stop the flow of terrorist fighters, and stamp out their vicious ideology. With nearly 10,000 airstrikes, we're taking out their leadership, their oil, their training camps, their weapons. We're training, arming, and supporting forces who are steadily reclaiming territory in Iraq and Syria. If this Congress is serious about winning this war and wants to send a message to our troops and the world, authorize the use of military force against ISIL. Take a vote. Take a vote. But the American people should know that with or without congressional action, ISIL will learn the same lessons as terrorists before them. If you doubt America's commitment, or mine, to see that justice is done, just ask Osama Bin Laden. Ask the leader of Al Qaida in Yemen, who was taken out last year, or the perpetrator of the Benghazi attacks, who sits in a prison cell. When you come after Americans, we go after you. And it may take time, but we have long memories, and our reach has no limits.
With the rules of war rewritten and the world changing at an unprecedented rate, it will take the might and savvy of the United States Special Forces to fight terrorism on a global scale. It may be on a battlefield in the desert, jungle, in a village or city, or even fighting cyber terrorists on their own digital turfs. The Special Operations Forces will be there.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.